my goodness, it's pretty incredible to see all the faces here. I was just reflecting back on the start of the company when I was sleeping on my buddy's couch, and it was just me and then Tanel and Estonia. So it's
Oh my God.
Awkward.
Oh my gosh.
It worked. Coach said. So this is the most important talk that I'll ever give to this company here at IDme, and I'm giving it in the context of a few different things that's happened. So the first is that we've grown from 45 people to over 115 people in 12 months. That's a lot, right? And we're still putting in formal processes even as we're growing and trying to keep up. And it's sort of like a 13-year-old, like everything's awkward and doesn't quite fit yet because we're having those growing pains and we're moving so quickly. And so in the interim, we really depended upon my reports to make sure that the culture is taught, even as we're working on some of these more formal training processes to really talk about what our culture means. And so I'll talk a little bit about why we led with some of the values that are up on the wall that we have right now and why they're specific. So the first thing is I'd seen a lot of companies that have values like excellence and integrity. That's what Enron had on their wall. And it's not quite clear what that means, right? And it's because culture is not a set of beliefs. Culture is what you do. It's a set of behaviors. And so the stuff that's up there that says don't be a jerk, it's pretty clear that what being a jerk entails. You can spot it when you see it. And so that was a specific behavior that was up there, so that when you see that behavior in action, you can question it and say, that's not what we do here, right? And the reason why this is a little bit more abrupt than planned is we had an incident over on the marketing side where we had a marketing manager who was screaming and yelling at people and was really creating a toxic environment to the point where if you looked at people reporting in sick and working from home, those things like immediately kind of jumped up when she was in charge of them, right? Folks were aware of that. It was tolerated for some period of time, and then when I became aware of it, that person was immediately moved out of IDme because it's not what we do. And the reason why we have values that are up on the wall is because it's what we live. The moment we as leaders or as teammates pass an action that's inconsistent with our values and you don't correct it, you just set a new standard. And for those situations, I'd rather actually not have the value of don't be a jerk up on the wall, because when we have that value up there and people are getting screamed at, we're hypocrites. And it's worse to be a hypocrite than it is to just be a straight up jerk, right? So that's some of the context. There were a lot of changes over on the marketing team because as Claudia and I ran an investigation. I'm not going to go into all the details around that, but if you trust me and trust Claudia, to do our diligence, we made a series of personnel decisions to make sure that we were protecting our culture. So now coming out of that, I'm ultimately responsible for everything that happens at this company as a CEO. Everything. I'm responsible for everything we do. I'm responsible for everything we don't do. Whether I'm aware of it or not, if I'm not aware of it, it's my fault for not putting in the right controls. If I'm aware of it and I don't correct it, it's my fault for not correcting it, right? So that's my job. I'm accountable for everything and I enforce our values. And the reason I moved up this training session is because we need to double click and go a level deeper into our values and really talk about the types of folks that we're looking to hire, the types of folks that we promote and that we reward and that we recognize, and then the types of folks that if we spot behaviors that are inconsistent with our values, then we move them out of the company very quickly. And so I'll start to go into some of these things. So I'm going to keep this to about an hour or less. I know it's a Friday afternoon. There's some videos that I put in here, and I'll circulate the deck as a resource. We'll have more training that is involved, but this is not just kind of an hour thing. This is my job of level setting the culture so that everyone has a clear understanding of what our culture is at a baseline, and then we'll have follow-on training at a future time when we've got more time dedicated for it to go in. So the first thing about IDme is that we have an audacious mission. We want to fix a core layer of the internet. Billions of people are on the internet. So we want to be part of the infrastructure that brings trust and convenience to the internet so that we can save people time and help them get access to services and benefits. It's a huge mission to build software that hundreds of millions, billions of people can use. We already support tens of millions of users. It's pretty incredible, right? And so, really, if I had to compare us to a military unit, we are like special forces. There's only 115 of us, and we have 18 million users that count on us to keep their data safe. We have customers that are the United States federal government that trusts us to do the right thing to make sure that legitimate folks are getting access to key services. Huge responsibility. Real ID is tied to national security. The 9/11 attacks and everything else, it dictates who can board an aircraft. We have a tremendous responsibility. And so there's a lot of companies that have tried to do this and they've failed. And so those companies are Microsoft Passport. They tried, they failed. Google Wallet, they tried, they failed. The telecoms, they had a project, they branded it ISIS. So probably the worst brand marketing mistake ever when ISIS actually came into Iraq in like 2013, 2014. That failed, obviously. When we started, Verizon Universal ID and Symantec were our competitors. I had venture capitalists tell me, how can little IDme compete with Verizon and Symantec? And I said, watch. That guy did not fund me, right? He did not fund us. But Verizon is out of business now. Symantec shut down their product, and guess who has all their customers? Us. And the reason we were able to do it is because despite all their resources, we're smarter, we work faster, and we're deeply committed to the mission. For Verizon, they saw the revenue line get up to like 10 million, and for them, they make billions of dollars. Not fast enough, kill the project. We're different. We understand the impact that identity can have on people's lives. In healthcare, people die because identity goes wrong. And it's not a technology problem, it's just a coordination problem. So, like Special Forces, we're executing against the most difficult missions where a lot of others have failed. There's been a tremendous number of startups that have tried to do this and failed, not least like the big companies that we've already taken down. Okay, next slide. So to unpack, culture as a set of behaviors, what I want to do is I want to specifically define the behaviors that will see you get promoted, that will see your compensation go up, that will see you recognized at IDme. And conversely, the behaviors that if you don't live those values at IDme, you won't be a good fit for our culture. I'm not going to preach about excellence or integrity because who actively tries to hire people that don't have integrity or aren't excellent? Thanks for the advice, good job. We're going to talk about specific traits and behaviors that actually lead to great performance. And we've already covered the last one about enforcing it. Okay, next. So if we had to sum up our cultural philosophy in 2 words, it's trust and results. The whole company is based on trust. What we sell is trust, right? When somebody says, hey, I'm Blake Hall to Veterans Affairs, whatever, the reason that VA can trust that is because IDme is saying, yeah, that's true. The user controls how their data is shared. We sell trust. And what we really care about are results. We don't train for time. We don't train for process. What we really care about is did we get the job done to standard or not? That's how I led my recon platoon. And that's the difference. It's like when we are able to execute, react to ambush to this standard and we're able to do it, everyone go home. And that could take us all day. It could take us several days. Or it could take us an hour and a half. And I don't care. As long as we're good and that's a standard, that's what we're training to, right? So we are a performance-based culture. We value results over effort. And that might seem controversial, but think about this for a moment. Some of us just aren't talented for certain roles, right? If you ask me to really train and try to be, an NFL cornerback, I could spend the rest of my life training, and I would never be as good as some 18-year-old who starts for the University of Alabama. Just not, his natural talent makes him more productive at that role than I will ever be. And so we really value talent and effort together, but if we had to choose, we're going to value highly skilled teammates, and we're going to value results. And I'll talk a little bit more about this. So if you think about special forces, a lot of folks focus on like Delta Force operators, or they'll focus on Army Rangers, and they'll focus on Navy SEALs. And yeah, sure, those folks are the tip of the spear. They're the frontline folks who really get the job done and have the most responsibility on them. They also take the most danger. The equivalent for IDme are engineers. To build software that supports potentially billions of people is a huge responsibility. On the sales side, to close accounts worth hundreds of millions of dollars is an exceptionally difficult thing. But beneath those special forces teams, there's armorers, there's truck drivers, there's cooks, there's primary care doctors that are taking care of that Delta operator's family while he's away to make sure that they're taken care of and that he's focused on the mission. And so special forces is not just what's in Hollywood and the folks who are pulling the triggers and deep behind enemy lines. It's a whole organization full of people in different roles, and the common theme is that they're all excellent at what they do, but the expectations are proportional to the role. So you think about the New England Patriots, right? You got Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, huge responsibility on those guys. But then they have an equipment manager. The equipment manager has a different job, and excellence means something else for that equipment manager, but he's expected to do his job. They certainly have a video guy, and he's pretty shady. But this is back to the Spider-Man quote that with great power comes great responsibility. You know, at IDme, I'm responsible for everything. That means if anything goes wrong, I'm the first one to take the heat for it. And I'll gladly take it. That's my job. I'm expected to generate over 10 times the return of my compensation for our investors. So I've got to be really good at my job, and I've got to move really quick. An entry-level employee is expected to generate maybe twice their compensation. It's much different. And so a lot of people will focus on like a raise or something else as like, oh, I've made it. It's like, no. What you've done is you've just accepted tremendous amounts of responsibility, right? It's the same thing for fundraising. Like when we raise $20, $40 million, people are like, congratulations. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. These folks, they want me to bring back $200 million if I raise 20. And if I raise 40, they want me to bring back $400 million. What I just did is I just signed myself up to run like the business equivalent of an Ironman. And I'm on the first step of a 100-mile run like my man Kyle over there, right? So the expectations are different, but what's common is excellence at your position. And the last thing I want to say is there's tremendous intimacy in performance-based units. On my recon platoon, we were a brotherhood, and in fact, I think we were closer than family because we counted on each other for our lives. If any one of us didn't do our jobs, curled up into a ball, valued our own safety over the team, our brothers would die. That's what it was. You had to have complete confidence that that person to your left and right cared more about the team and cared more about the mission than themselves. Because when combat starts, when bullets start flying, it's not natural to stand up and to shoot back. You want to get down, right? And it's training yourself and really caring about the team and the mission more than yourself that counts. And that breeds like just an unbelievable brotherhood and an unbelievable sense of intimacy. And families are different, right? No matter what my kids do, I will always love them. My loyalty is unconditional. Businesses aren't that way. If IDme wasn't growing quickly and it was stagnant, I would not expect my high performers to be loyal to the company. And in the same way, if somebody isn't performing to standard and isn't doing, their job, like why should we be loyal to that person, especially given what our mission is? And our mission is to save people a tremendous amount of time. California DMV, I've quoted this number before, but 2 million people or so every year will show up at the DMV with wrong documents. And if it takes them 3 hours, which is probably small, to go home and get the right documents and go back to get their real ID, that's 6 million hours per year just in California that's wasted. So who as one person is more important than that? Even that one flow, than 6 million hours of people's time that they could be spending with their families, with their kids, pursuing hobbies. And time at the DMV is probably the worst time in terms of quality of life that you could have, right? So just like in Special Forces, the mission is bigger than us. And so my sphere of compassion, I love people. I'm a kind person. I care about everybody. I want them to be successful. There's no one person that we've hired here that I don't deeply care about them being successful, and I'm invested in it. But the mission and our culture is way more important because we want to be the identity layer for the United States of America and then for the world. So next slide. So how do you spot gifted teammates? Now, I wish I could come up with this list, but this is actually taken from the website for the traits of gifted children. And it's early signs that you've got gifted children. And what's, before I go into like the specifics of what I think is interesting, what I think is more interesting is that there's this notion that there's a certain class of kids who grew up in rural schools or inner cities that just can't perform at the level of rich kids that come from elite communities. That's absolute bullshit. And I know that that's bullshit because one of my classes at Harvard Business School was with a teacher named Stacy Childress, and she now works for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And there's a school system called KIPP, Knowledge is Power program, and they went into Brooklyn, and they went into Hispanic communities in Texas and Houston, and they took kids who at the 5th grade were already 3 years behind at the reading and writing at a 2nd grade level, math at a 2nd grade level. They had to work their asses off, and those kids had to work a lot harder, but by the 8th grade, 100% of them were at grade level proficiency or above, and they were outperforming the rich kids at the elite schools, every single kid in some of those school systems. And so what they did is they just called bullshit. They said maybe the system's broken, maybe the system of delivering education's broken, but in fact, if you put any kid in the right position to learn and you give them the tools to be successful and they work hard, they can actually be excellent. And I think what's beautiful about like kind of human strengths is that intelligence is universal, but knowledge and expertise is domain specific. So my older brother growing up had a really hard time. He wasn't like an A student. He was C's and stuff in high school, but he was taking TVs out of the garbage and fixing them and making them work. He now briefs the CEOs of Verizon because he's installing the 5G switches at Sony Ericsson. My parents missed that when they were growing up. They were really hard on him, but I saw that he was a genius. He was just a genius in a different way. And that's what's true. That goes back to the special forces team. Even on the team, you've got your comms guys, your demo guys, your medics. They've all specialized within like different roles on that team that collectively make them really resilient, and they cross-train on secondary functions so that if any one of them goes down, the team can still move forward. And so I think that we're looking for these traits, but these traits are more common than you might think. This is not just confined to a small group of people, and depending on the role, sometimes you'll spot a lot of these traits that are really relevant. One of the things I think that's really interesting is a sense of humor is associated with being gifted, right? And there's sort of an innate confidence and humility that goes along with being funny. And then go next. I think the effective ones are really interesting. High expectations of self. I really like this one, need for consistency between abstract values and personal actions, because those are the folks who are going to say like, hey, what's going on over here doesn't match the values on the wall. They really care about that stuff. And what's really interesting too is that high performers are more self-critical. So you might have seen that in school. It's like, the kid who scored a 99 on a test, and he's like, oh man, shoot, I should have had 100. And you're like, come on, like, everyone's like, I got my 85. But it's not even that. It's sometimes, it's in sports too, right? You have like an all-star quarterback who throws for 300 plus yards, and they're like, great game. He's like, oh, I missed like 3 throws. And so what's really interesting is that your highest performers are actually more self-critical. It's mediocre performers who actually need more positive feedback for average work. So if you can screen for high performers up front, you'll actually find they're more accountable, that they learn faster. And that's exactly why we're feeding that back into our hiring process so that we can look for folks who assign blame internally a lot more than externally. Because I can tell you, if you're interviewing somebody and you ask about a project that went wrong, and they start talking about how awful their boss was and how awful their teammates were, that's going to be you in like 72 hours right after you extend them an offer. And the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. That's the quote from the FBI profiling team. If somebody goes, this project went wrong and maybe the conditions weren't great, but I know that if I had done this differently, we could have had a better shot at being successful, I'm going to hire that person 10 times out of 10 times. Okay, next. So we want stars in every position. Raw ability and intelligence trumps experience. And there's a link there. I'm not going to play it right now in the interest of time, but like Mark Zuckerberg actually talks about that. Whatever you think about him, he built a company that's worth several $100 billion, so he knows what he's talking about. And there's a lot of research to support that. I want to focus on this keeper test for retention, right? And this is very simple. As we grow and as our responsibility goes up, we're going to have a simple test for managers. And that's, if your report was being recruited by a competitor, would you fight to keep them? And if the answer is no, we're immediately going to offer a very generous severance package. Because the most important part of special forces is that if somebody's here that is not living the standards, you have to move them out or they're going to impact the culture. And we're going to become like all the other big companies that are around us that have values on the wall but that aren't actually important. And our odds of achieving our mission are going to go down. The corollary of that, which is maybe a different frame to think about it, is would you work for this person? If the answer is ever no, how could you ever morally let a team of people work for that person? If you yourself wouldn't do it, how could you let that team suffer from that? And I'm very fortunate that in my life, like when you go to Harvard Business or you're a successful founder, half of that's skill, half of that's luck. I was very lucky that I had wonderful bosses when I first went into the military who taught me what good leadership looks like, what openness and transparency for sharing of information looks like. And I demand that as we have young people that come into IDme, I want to create that same environment where they have great leaders and who help them achieve their best potential to be their best self. That's very important to me. Other companies might have a different set of expectations, and in fact, like any relationship that isn't working out, when has it ever worked out where you're dating someone, you know it's not going to work, and you let it go on longer?
Oh my gosh.
Why would work be any different, right? And in fact, the faster you break up, if it's just a cup of coffee, nobody really cares or even remembers it, right? But if you let it go on too long and you know it's toxic and not going to work out, everybody is more bitter in the end, and that's just universally true. So back to, this is the sphere of compassion, right? So when I look at a performer, everybody goes, oh, I want to focus on the individual, or I know that this person should be doing this, but they're not really doing it, and I don't want to dime them out. That's the wrong sphere of compassion. The sphere of compassion is, how is this individual impacting the team? If they're an individual contributor that can't do the work on themselves and they're making other people focus on their job, they're hurting the team. Like, why do we even hire somebody in the first place? Anybody? So they can help, right? So they can help. Hiring people is us saying, I can't keep up. I need help. And so if somebody comes in to help and they're not actually helping you, then did your action actually solve the problem? Nope. And this is also what's true, right? If you go back to that high-performing culture, if you put me at left corner for the University of Alabama, how would I impact the team? I'd be getting burned for 80-yard touchdowns like every time out there, right? And then everyone on the team, they're no longer focused on their job, they're focused on covering down for my weakness. So now my A players aren't focused on being their best self, they're like, I can't trust this person, so I'm going to like hedge and try to do more than my job. And the whole culture falls apart and the performance falls apart too. Just one person. That is true in sports, it's true in special forces, it is true at work. And that's just the team. Then there's the impact on the company. Now the company's got degraded performance, we start missing our goals. Maybe we have stuff going on in information security that shouldn't be going on. Maybe like engineers writing bad code, they're trying to like, cover down for one developer, we're shipping features slower. And for what we're doing for helping government agencies at the scale that we are, millions of users, that could be millions and tens of millions of people that could be saving time that aren't able to do it. Marketing doesn't understand the product or something. Well, now we're not getting leads. And all the leads that would have turned into opportunities, that would have turned into integrations, that would have turned into members, we never get them, right? So my sphere of compassion is this, and you only need to look at the wall to see that we already have 18 million users to understand how much of an impact we're already having. So when would one individual ever be worth more than 18 million people who depend on us to protect their information and to do our job? And the answer is never, especially when the core goal of what you try to do is get help and you actually created more work. And that's why if you don't move them out, next slide. I wanted to call it Rudy real quick. So Pete told me that at the University of Michigan they have a shirt that says Rudy sucks. And so what I want to say is, like, what do we value? Who's going to get paid more at IDme? A player in the right role, right? LeBron James. As I look at Michael Jordan when he tried to play baseball, even an elite athlete, wrong role, right? So it's true there too. But when you get the right player in the right role, we keep that person, we reward them. I mean, that's Zenis and Juan over on the member support team, just all-stars who are absolutely, killing it. It's Pradeep and like Becky who comes in and is just doing a phenomenal job on his team. Those are the right fit and the right role. Rudy, for like all of his inspirational qualities, is more of a mascot than a football player, right? How many play? He played 2 plays. He practiced 4 years to play 2 plays when the game was already over. And while that is inspiring, it is not good business. So like you want to find the right role for yourself that allows you to be your best self. And if you find that here at IDme, we're going to pay you a lot of money. All right, next slide.
Did Phil pick that picture?
So here is our compensation. So this is the positive side of it. We pay top of market. We're going to calibrate once per year. And if we feel like you could go out, like we like you, we want to retain you, and that you could go out and get a better offer somewhere else, we're going to proactively calibrate you to the top of the market. We're going to do that once per year for all of our employees. Unlimited vacation. So this is where trust comes in, right? You have to have people you can trust if you give them policies where there is no vacation policy. All we care about is results. If you're a high performer, you can choose your own adventure. And honestly, that's what I love about being an entrepreneur, and that's why I'm extending it to the culture, is that if I've been like killing myself, I've been working over the weekend, staying up till 2 in the morning, yeah, I'll roll in at 1 or 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Or I'll take a few days off because I'm just burnt out. I want that same freedom for my high performers because that's how I like to manage my time. And that's how I want you to be able to manage your time too. We offer stock options. We offer 3 months of paid parental leave here at IDme. We offer a 401k match program. Those things are only possible if we have all-stars. If we pay people that we brought in to help who aren't helping us and we're paying them top of market, does that sound like a business that's going to be around very long? Right? So you either cut the dead weight or we all go down with the ship. And that's just how it works. But the upside is that it's going to be a really fun environment. The other part too is that there's no shame, right? Think about what makes cultures different, right? The whole point of having a culture deck is that we're different from other organizations. When you go try to join the Rangers, you know it's going to be fucking hard. You know it's going to be hard, and that the standards are where they're at. And honestly, like if you can't make the standards, who would say like, oh, the Rangers should change their standards for me? No. And so what this does is it allows us to signal to the market to say we want high performers, and if you don't have this drive and this desire to always compete and inspire people with your passion where you really deeply care about your mission, don't even apply here, right? But if you do, the expectations are high, but you're going to work with all-star teammates and we're going to pay you a lot of money. That's what it is, right? So, and that's why people go to special forces and they go to buds. But if somebody washes out of buds, like most people don't make it. The selection rate is very small. Ranger School, there's like a 30% pass rate, and those are the cream of the crop guys who've already been through multiple layers of screening, even to have the opportunity to have a shot at it, right? So that's exactly what we want to do. And we're actually publishing that if we make a mistake during kind of a selection process, we'll offer 2 weeks of severance. If after 30 days we keep you, we're actually going to give mandatory 3-month severance. And that's how we take care of people. So not only are we going to move people out, we're going to take care of them because that's our fault. And in the same way that if you let a relationship that's not going to work out go on too long, we're really going to up the compensation to make sure that people have plenty of time to find the right place for them. And so we've adopted a very generous severance policy as well. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to move pretty quickly through here, but I want to share a few things. Go ahead. We're only half an hour in. The first one, given what happened in marketing, I really want to emphasize this. We don't tolerate jerks, brilliant jerks, like temporary jerks, certified jerks. I don't care, right? Like we don't tolerate any of them. And you know why? Because who wants to work for a jerk? Nobody. So your top talent leaves when they have to work for assholes. That's the way it works. And how are you going to recruit somebody if like, oh, that manager, that guy's a jerk, right? You can't even attract or retain top talent. And then the impact is always toxic because people are demoralized. And even if that person's individual results are great, the net impact on the company is always costly. That is zero tolerance. We treat people with respect and dignity always. And some of the behaviors here is like, you don't make people scared to come into work. You don't make people cry, right? That's what it means to not be a jerk. And we enforce that rigorously here at IDme. The other part too is that one of my favorite things is that when somebody starts, I see people come to desks and they just welcome people to the team. It's amazing to see somebody set up their desk for the first time and just to see them like swarmed with people saying hello and like introducing themselves. I never want to lose that at IDme. It's one of my favorite things about this company and why I love the people who work here is just how friendly everyone is. And that's also a litmus test to let me know that we're doing a good job of living that value. Always compete. So our best employees have this just habit of competing no matter how big or small. The foosball table, Mario Kart. The best way to get me to do something is to say like I can't do it, right? If you want me to do pretty much anything, be like you couldn't do that, and like I'm gonna go do it because like that's what it is, and that's what high performers are. They're just super competitive. They love to win, even when winning is like irrational, right? It doesn't actually do anything for them. They just want to win.
He's coming to Zumba next week.
You did it the wrong way. You can't do Zumba.
I mean, sorry, I can't do Zumba.
Now I'll go to Zumba. All right, so can you play the Will Smith video real quick? Because I love this Will Smith breakdown of what it means to compete.
Full screen right there. Yeah.
Oh, can we get to the Here, we'll get it up.
What did you say,
The only thing that I see that is distinctly different.
Wow.
Turn on that.
This is not excellence.
Yeah, not Here.
TLDR, you'll die on a treadmill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh no, I need this to work though. It's hot up here. Can you turn this real quick? Oh, I heard it boot.
Distinctly different. Right? I will run. You will not be outworked. I will not be outworked. Right. Period. You know, you might have more talent than me. You might be smarter than me. You might be sexier than me. You might be all of those things. You got it on me in 9 categories. But if we get on the treadmill together, right, there's 2 things. You're getting off first, or I'm gonna die. It's that simple.
So there's a lot of research to support this, right? You'll hear sometimes like Harvard or Stanford, they'll reject kids with perfect test scores. And you'll see something like Malcolm Gladwell did some research on your statistical likelihood of winning the Nobel Prize. And it turns out that if you're a scientist, once you get to an IQ of 130, the statistical likelihood of you winning the Nobel Prize is no different than even if your IQ is 160. So at 130, you're smart enough to win a Nobel Prize, and at that point, other attributes and other behaviors like competition take over. And you can even see that in sports. Like Jerry Rice, when he went through the combine, he ran like a 4.6 something. Tom Brady was a 6th-round draft pick. So he was just threshold. He was just over that limit of like good enough. Tom Brady's never had the best arm, but now the work ethic goes into play. And if you are just over the threshold, but you work your ass off and make excellence a habit in your life, you can accomplish great things to the point where Tom Brady's now regarded probably as the greatest quarterback of all time. Maybe Eric disagrees. And so, you know, the thing here is like the drive to be great is really competitive people say, what do I need to do to be good at my job? And they figure out what those skills are and they go out and they acquire them and then they repeat them and they hone them and they get so good that over time you see excellence develop. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a great story. Like, I love Arnold, of course, but he came over. He came over as an immigrant from Austria, was a bricklayer, then a professional bodybuilder, and won the world title, several times. And then became the governor of California. Remarkable for somebody who didn't even speak English as their first language. Maybe it's Nelson. All right, next slide. Okay, so curiosity is also a key value too, right? And that starts with researching IDme even before your interview. And if folks just show up and they don't even know, they haven't even been to our website or don't understand it, we don't want you, right? Like, you want a job. This is not a job. We have a mission that you need to be deeply committed to. And if you didn't care enough to even research for your interview, where that moment is all about you, like, how would you ever care about a team or a mission with the level of intensity that we need you to care about it in order to be successful here? So the very first thing that we just look for in the interview is, like, did you do your homework? Or are we like any other company that, as long as we give you a paycheck, those people will ruin our culture if we let them in. It'll be a 9 to 5. Openly sharing information. This is huge for me. This is what my commander did for me in the military, and I loved it because I was so much more effective because I had context. My second commander hoarded information from me, and I hated it because I knew what was possible with all the other information. And so, at IDme, like, we have some sensitive things that are going on, so some things need to be partitioned off, but my bias is always to share information. There were some things going on in marketing where people were told not to come talk to me or not to go talk to Tanel. That in itself is a behavior that I will immediately stop, and anyone who told somebody that or tolerated it is going to be gone. Because we're an open culture. I spend time with member support. I spend time with every single person in this company because I want you to know that there is no wrong question to ask me, and I'm an open book when it comes to learning, and it's reciprocal because I get to learn more about your job and what's going on at my company. My bosses in the military called it leadership by walking around. You don't actually know what's happening in your company unless you get out of your office and walk around, and that's why I actually sit out on the floor. I don't care about offices. I don't care. I've slept in dirt holes, right? Like, if I'm not doing that, we're all right. It's a good day. So it's great. Proactively seeking guidance for what's expected of you. Don't wait. If you don't know how your activities align with IDme's job or what you're expected to do, if you do that long enough, somebody's going to be like, oh, you didn't do all these things, and then you'll be responsible for it. Go out and seek, hey, what does success look like for my role? What do you expect of me and align my activities? And really, in a startup, that becomes really important. All right, next slide. This is super important too, and this is a recent learning for me. I keep learning more, every week, month, year at IDme. Every entrepreneur I know is an optimist. And I think it's almost like a universal truth. There's probably one or two outliers of pessimists who started companies, but by and large, every entrepreneur is an optimist. Because if you're a pessimist, how can you believe that you're going to change the world, right? You're going to be doubting yourself. And everyone has that family member or somebody in their circle when you tell them about a goal that you want to achieve, and they're like, oh, you can never do that, right? And they bring you down. We want to keep them out of here because we're changing the world, and you need people who are going to believe in you and lift you up, and when you're down, they're going to tell you, chin up, we got it. That's what Kelly Purdue did for me when I thought the company wasn't going to work in 2011. I said, Kelly, I don't think this is going to work. And he said, first, never tell that to anyone else ever again. And then he's like, second, chin up, we got this. And I'm so grateful to him because if he'd been a pessimist and been like, yeah, I knew this call was coming, I wouldn't be talking to all of you right now. So we want teammates who are positive, who lift each other up, and we want to screen for that. So even in hiring during the interview process, we can ask questions like, what do you want to do in your next role? And it's a Rorschach test, right? If they're like, I'm really passionate about X, Y, Z, and I know I want to do that, they're a positive person. If they say, I know that I absolutely do not want to do these things, okay, that's great that you hate those things, but that really doesn't tell me what you're passionate about and what really inspires you. And that's probably a negative person that if you bring them in, they're going to bring people down because they just have a negative tilt. I wanted to play the Steve Jobs quote clip too because he has more credibility than I do, and it's better to hear it from him.
You have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing, and it's totally true. And the reason is because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard. And you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, if you're not having fun doing it, you don't really love it, you're going to give up. And that's what happens to most people, actually. If you really look at the ones that ended up, being successful, unquote, in the eyes of society, and the ones that didn't, oftentimes it's the ones that were successful loved what they did so they could persevere when it got really tough. And the ones that didn't love it quit because they're sane. Right? Who would want to put up with this stuff if you don't love it? So it's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of worrying constantly. And if you don't love it, you're going to fail. So you got to love it. You got to have passion. And I think that's the high order bit. The second thing is you've got to be a really good talent scout, because no matter how smart you are, you need a team of great people, and you've got to figure out how to size people up fairly quickly, make decisions without knowing people too well, and hire them, and see how you do, and refine your intuition, and be able to help build an organization that can eventually just build itself, because you need great people around you.
So, if you didn't believe me, you can believe Steve Jobs. What he said, is absolutely true, and I'll tell you that as the founder of this company, to hop on when the Real ID application was being launched, and to see Pradeep and Justin and Mayor and Pete and that whole crew on the weekend, Jeremy involved as well, like just making sure that we got that live on a Saturday and on a Sunday. I was like, man, that was inspiring to me to see that level of commitment and dedication, because people knew how important that was for Californians, for the DMV, for IDme as a company. Really awesome. And that's what I want to keep. I want to keep that same level of commitment to excellence and passion. And the other part of it too is that you equip the people around you to win. And we can all see, like, passion isn't like the rah-rah, like, oh man, it's just a deep commitment to whatever it is that you're doing, and a perseverance to get through whatever it takes. Well, I got an Arnold clip here. I'm not going to play it right now, but come on, what's wrong with you? Everyone's sitting here getting flabby when you could be doing push-ups. I'm looking at you and I'm just thinking about all the muscle mass that's being lost. Right. One more thing, we're going to take out the moon. The tide's coming in, it's going out, it can make up its mind, we don't need that bullshit anymore. Making people werewolves and stuff, so we're going to take it out. Sorry. So look, make something better every day is what it sounds like. It's like if there's trash on the floor, you pick it up. And if we see people doing that, it's like, then I know that if you see, hey man, that legal contract library is so disorganized, I'm gonna fix that up. And even if it's out in my work stream, I'll just go, and the way I'll say it is, hey Michelle, or hey Brian, I noticed that the legal contract stuff, isn't great. Maybe you don't have enough time, but I'd really love to help out. And two things will happen. Either they'll say like, no, you're right, I got it. Or they'll say, thank you, I'm overwhelmed, and like, I'd appreciate that help. People who do that, if you come through, that's how you get promoted. That's how you get paid more. Because when it comes time for somebody to say, hey, what about so-and-so? They'll be like, oh my God, like I was drowning, they helped me out. Or they offered to help me out and I really appreciated it. By being proactive and by fixing stuff outside your lane, and this is the kind of basic activity that helps you see it. So, if you leave dirty dishes or whatever, like fix that habit, because that's the same thing as this right here. Right? That if you're leaving dirty dishes and you don't care, I know that sloppiness is carrying over into your professional work too. Okay, next. This is awesome, and I think this is super important, right? Because all of us have been on customer support calls where we've been frustrated, and the worst thing is when you talk to somebody who like talks down to you or is condescending because you're already frustrated. And oftentimes, like, even if they can't help you, what really helps is if they can just connect with you and empathize with you and say, yeah, we know that process is really broken, and at least give you some context as to why and maybe an action plan for how it's going to get fixed. We had to do that before virtual in-person proofing was there, like Debbie knows that, where there were just some customers we couldn't help. And that's why it became powerful when we could. But even saying like, oh, we're so sorry, but I want you to know that our engineers are working their tails off. This is, a problem that's in the market, and we're working to fix it. And I'd like to show this video too. I saw this as a student at Harvard Business School in my leadership class, and it stuck with me on the difference between empathy and sympathy.
Year has been the best year ever. So my business.
This is, oh, it's sad.
Qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, huh? No. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think your marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one thing that we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
It's so true, right? Even when you can't help somebody, as long as they feel understood and you've connected with them, it really matters, and it matters. I'm very proud of our member support team because I can sense a lot of empathy and care on that team, and that's super important because all that laughter and that connection that you guys have, I know that's flowing down to the members who are coming in, that you're taking care of them and doing a great job. Next slide. This is the last video that we'll show, and it's probably the most impactful. So, Jocko Willink is a Navy SEAL, and he talks now on leadership and ownership. And I was in a similar situation to Jocko in Iraq, and I can tell you that it's pretty awful to be responsible for a mistake that permanently harms people. A few days later, I was being decorated for heroism, right? And so a few things happened there. I had a boss that could have relieved me of my platoon based on some of the decisions I made. It wasn't something I directly did, but I set the conditions, and as the leader who's responsible for it, I was at fault. But I didn't run away from accountability because it was my fault, and I owned it. And I showed that I learned from it, and he trusted me, and then a few days later, we saved a lot of lives. And that's one of the things about war, is that sometimes it's awful, and sometimes there's these moments of humanity that really you wouldn't see in any other context. And so, personally, I've been accountable for some of the worst things that you could ever imagine that a person could be accountable for, and I know that you can grow from it and that you can be successful as long as you don't run from it. You have to own it. And so Jocko's going to talk a little bit about that, and I think it's really powerful. After this happens.
War is a nightmare. War is awful. It is indifferent and devastating and evil. War is hell. But war is also an incredible teacher, a brutal teacher. And it teaches you lessons that you will not forget. In war, you are forced to see humanity at its absolute worst. And you are also blessed to see humanity in its most glorious moments. War teaches you about sorrow and loss and pain. And it teaches you about the preciousness and the fragility of human life. And in that fragility, war teaches you about death. But war also teaches you about brotherhood and honor and humility and leadership. And unfortunately, war teaches you the most when things go wrong. And for me, one of the most impactful lessons that I learned from war was in the spring of 2006 in the city of Ramadi, Iraq, which at the time was the epicenter of the insurgency, where brutal and determined terrorists ruled the streets with torture and rape and murder. And it was in one neighborhood of that city, during an operation that I was in charge of, when all hell broke loose. We had multiple units out on the battlefield fighting the enemy. We had friendly Iraqi soldiers, we had U.S. Army soldiers and U.S. Marines, along with small elements of my SEAL team. And then the fog of war rolled in, with its confusion and chaos and mayhem, and with its gunfire and enemy attacks and screaming men and blood and death. And in that fog of war, through a series of mistakes and human error and poor judgment and Murphy's Law and just plain bad luck, a horrendous firefight broke out. But this firefight, it wasn't between us and the enemy. This firefight, tragically, was between us and us. Friendly forces against friendly forces. Fratricide. The mortal sin of combat. And the most horrific part of war. And when it was over, and the fog of war lifted, one friendly Iraqi soldier was dead, 2 more were wounded. One of my men was wounded, the rest of my SEALs were badly shaken. And it was only through a miracle that no one else was killed. And it was reported up the chain of command what had happened. That we had fought and wounded and killed each other. And when we got back to base, things didn't get much better. There was a message waiting for me from my commanding officer. And it said, shut down all operations. It said that the commanding officer, the master chief, and the investigating officer were inbound to my location. And they told me to prepare a debrief to explain exactly what had happened on the operation and what had gone wrong. Now, I knew what this meant. It meant that somebody had to pay. It meant that somebody had to be held accountable. It meant that somebody had to get fired for what had happened. So, I began to prepare my debrief. And in it, I detailed every mistake that was made and who made it. And I pointed out every failure in the planning and the preparation and the execution in the operation. And I pointed out who was responsible for that failure. There was plenty of blame to go around. There were so many people that I could incriminate with guilt. But something wasn't right. For some reason, I just couldn't put my finger on who was at fault and who specifically I should blame for what had happened. And I sat and I went over it again and again, and I struggled for an answer. And then, when I was about 10 minutes from starting the debrief, that answer came, and it hit me like a slap in the face. And I realized that there was only one person to blame for the confusion, only one person to blame for the wounded men, and only one person to blame for the dead Iraqi soldier. And I knew exactly who that person was. And with that knowledge, I walked into the debriefing room with my commanding officer and the master chief and the investigating officer were sitting there waiting for me, along with the rest of my men, including my SEAL that had been wounded, who was sitting in the back of the room with his head and his face all bandaged up. And I stood up before them and I asked them one simple question. Whose fault was this? One of my SEALs raised his hand. And he said, it was my fault. I didn't keep control of the Iraqi soldiers I was with. And they left their designated sector, and that was the root of all these problems. And I said, no, it wasn't your fault. And then another SEAL raised his hand and said, it was my fault. I didn't pass our location over the radio fast enough, so no one knew what building we were in, and that's what caused all this confusion. It was my fault. And I said, no, it wasn't your fault either. And then another SEAL raised his hand. And he said, boss, this was my fault. I didn't properly identify my target. And I shot and killed that friendly Iraqi soldier. This was my fault. And I said, no, this wasn't your fault either. And it wasn't yours or yours or yours, I said as I pointed to the rest of the SEALs in the room. And then I told them that there was only one person at fault for what had happened. There was only one person to blame. And that person was me. I am the commander. I am the senior man on the battlefield, and I am responsible for everything that happens. Everything. And then I went on to explain to them some new tactics, techniques, and procedures that we were going to implement to ensure that this kind of travesty never happened again. And I will tell you something, it hurt. It hurt my ego. It hurt my pride to take the blame. But I also knew I knew that to maintain my integrity as a leader and as a man, I had to take responsibility. And in order to do that, I had to control my ego so that my ego did not control me. And you know what? I didn't get fired. In fact, my commanding officer, who had expected excuses and finger pointing, when I took responsibility, when I took ownership, he now trusted me even more. And my men, they didn't lose respect for me. Instead, they realized that I would never shirk responsibility, and I would never pass that heavy burden of command down the chain and onto them. And you know what? They had the same attitude. Unlike a team where no one takes ownership of the problems, and therefore the problems never get solved, with us, everyone took ownership of their mistakes. Everyone took ownership of the problems. And when a team takes ownership of its problems, the problems get solved. And that is true on the battlefield, it is true in business, and it is true in life. So I say, take ownership. Take extreme ownership. Don't make excuses. Don't blame any other person or any other thing. Get control of your ego. Don't hide your delicate pride from the truth. Take ownership of everything in your world, the good and the bad. Take ownership of your mistakes, take ownership of your shortfalls, take ownership of your problems, and then take ownership of the solutions that will get those problems solved. Take ownership of your mission. Take ownership of your job, of your team, of your future, and take ownership of your life. And lead. Lead. Lead yourself and your team and the people in your life. Lead them all to victory. Thank you.
That's an intense video, and that's why I saved it for the last. But what I want you to know is that there's a process for ownership. And I've been in a different but similar situation where I was stripped down and vulnerable, and I had to own it, and I had to take it. There's only one way to do it. I'm responsible. Here's what went wrong. Here's how I'm going to fix it. And then you trust that your boss will make the decision that's right. Because in those situations, that's all you can do. If I had gotten fired, he would have been totally within his rights to fire me. And if that had happened, that would have been part of my punishment for what I had done. But I was shown grace. And like Jocko's boss, my boss trusted me more. And if I've been shown grace in that environment, I can tell you I am anxious to extend grace to everyone here when you make a mistake. As long as you are honest about what happened, you can tell me what went wrong, and you can tell me how you're going to get better and how you're going to learn. Honestly, the most important skill that I have as an entrepreneur is my ability to learn. My only business experience was people shooting at me before I started this company, right? Everything has been learning. Culture, hiring, marketing, sales. I knew nothing. I knew how to hunt terrorists, right? That's what I knew. And the way that relationships and marriages break down is there's a feedback loop that starts where somebody gives feedback and it's ignored. And you ignore feedback and it leads to resentment. And then the resentment builds as the feedback isn't listened to and it leads to anger. And then the final stage is disengagement. And that's where relationships die and divorces happen and all sorts of harm happens. But you'll notice it wasn't just Jocko, it was every member of his team said it was my fault. And if you go back to the gifts of high-performing people, those folks who are self-critical, they're the first ones to say, I was responsible. And that's why in the hiring process, when we look for assignment of blame, we look for people who proactively seek blame because we know that they learn faster than other people who don't. The moment you blame somebody else for something that went wrong, you're not learning and you're running. And ironically, those are the people that won't make it here. And so I would just say that we'll all make mistakes. I know that you'll make mistakes. And it would be extremely hard at IDme to screw up worse than I screwed up in my life. But the formula is if you own it, if you run right into it, if you tell them what went wrong and how you're going to get better, the odds of grace being extended are extremely high. Okay? Next slide. This is also important when it goes to being a reliable teammate, a teammate that folks can trust, and that's that you do your homework. You do your research, you cite things, you make sure that it's polished up so that there's minimal rework when you pass it over to other folks. And if you make that a habit in your life, because it really does have to be a habit, it's very easy to just throw something together and be like, hey, what do you think? Or what do you think? What do you think? Don't do that. Make it as good as you can get it before you get it to somebody else. And then when you think it's as good as you can get it, do it again, right? Because you're there, the reason your role exists is because somebody else is overwhelmed. That's why you were hired. They don't have time. Get it as good as you can get it and focus on polishing up all the details so that people can trust you and that you really demonstrate ownership over your work stream. Okay, next. You know, one thing that Amazon said, and I think it's interesting, that this is true at all levels in the company. This is our job to teach folks that we make decisions based on data and not on opinions. I am very self-aware of my strengths and weaknesses. I'm a good sales leader. I'm close with customers. I understand the strategy and the context. But there are more things that I'm bad at than I'm good at, and that's why I've got a great team. And the way that we make decisions is we share information, we use data, and then once we make a decision, we move out and we commit to it. Even if folks disagree on what it's going to be, once we make the decision, we're committed to it. And that's how high-performing teams work. Whatever dissent or whatever else happens, it happens during the decision-making process. Once the decision has been made, we're a team. That's true with parenting, too. You can't show a divided front to your kids because they will own you. So, but the difference here is that we put in systems and processes to increase the speed and accuracy of our decisions. Because the reason why Verizon is out of this market, Symantec and everything else, we move faster. The reason why Experian is way ahead and now we've passed them and we can do international users and they can't is that we move faster. So Amazon, Jeff Bezos is very blunt about this. Good leaders have a track record of being right. And the reason they're right most of the time is because they're good learners. And because they're good learners, they have an information advantage over the market. And just like if you have an information advantage over the stock market, you're going to have a basket of stocks that outperform. You can tell a good manager because they have a track record of being right more often than they're wrong because their decision making is sound and they've learned more than other people. Okay. You know, we've covered this on sort of the ownership side, but this is a little bit different. This is about incrementalism, and it's actually an interesting slide. But if you look at Jeff Skilling at Enron and how some of these corporate scandals started, Bernie Madoff, they all start with small lies, and then the lies it spirals a little bit. It gets out of control, and all of a sudden you realize, oh man, if I have to report this situation now, they'll know that I lied to them in a small way. And so you don't. So the situation gets worse. And there's some extreme examples of this. There was a trader for a French bank named Societe Generale who lost several $1 billion for that bank because he kept making bigger and bigger bets. He was literally gambling and trying to make up for his losses, and they compounded enough that he lost several $1 billion. So if you think you've had a bad day or night at Vegas, that day's worse. But that's why it's so important to lean into truth, and that's why honesty is so important as well. We have to screen for a track record of honesty. If somebody doesn't tell the truth, then you can't trust them. And what's the foundation of our company? Trust. You have to be able to trust people. It's why Jocko was able to fall on his sword and his boss trusted him more. The moment when people lie or they're not direct or they obscure truth, you can't trust them. You know, maybe the moment when like a parent realizes their kid lied to them for the first time, it's got to be pretty devastating where it's like, oh, like, didn't trust me enough to like shoot me straight, right? Like, so our job is in a business context where the consequences are much more severe because tens of millions of people are counting on us, you have to tell people the truth. You can't hide it. And the moment we lose our ability to trust one another, that's when we lose the culture, right? So being truthful in all cases is very important. All right, next. I love this one, right? And I'll talk about a few examples in combat where I did this. So I had a boss who was hunting medals, and he didn't come out with this very often because as a recon platoon leader, I reported to the battalion commander, but he rolled with us one time. And there were 2 IEDs that had been reported on this this avenue with a sniper position. And we had an asset on our truck that required us to turn off our jammers, our IED jammers when it was in use. And he directed me to turn off those jammers and to drive past both of those roadside bombs so that I could draw contact. And it was an unethical order. Legal order, I can't refuse it, but it was an unethical order. And so there's a tension in loyalty there. And my first loyalty was to my men. I had 32 men and their moms and dads who counted on me to bring their kids back. And some of those men were dads, and they had kids. And I knew that was a horrible tactical decision. So what I did was, I drove through it, but I put all my guys in, I kept the jammers on. And guess what? Those things didn't go off. When I got back to the Tactical Operations Center, the battalion staff had seen that because they could track our movement, and they were like, what the fuck happened? And I was like, you need to take that up with Captain Phillips. I was like, well, I'll be damned if I'm going to turn the jammers off. So the thing is, I disobeyed in that way, but then I immediately reported what I did to my commander and let him deal with it, right? And I brought all my guys home at the end of my tour. All of them came back. And the second one was, Iraq was like an ammunition dump. And we've been ordered to clear, houses and look for explosives, but we're scouts and snipers. We're not trained explosives ordnance disposal. And we've been ordered to like go into all these abandoned houses. And I said, well, will you give us explosives ordnance? And the answer was no. They're like, but you need to go in those houses. And so the frame for me is, if I find an ammunitions cache in this house, awesome, I've removed 1/1,000,000th of the ordnance in Iraq, right? But if there's a tripwire set up and my team hits it, I just lost 1/4 of my platoon, and I'm going to send 6 guys home in American flags, over caskets. And so in that situation, I said, Roger, we cleared it. Good. And I told everyone, all the other platoon leaders, like, just don't go into abandoned houses. Because the reward of going into the house is not worth the risk. Like, why would you risk, 6 guys over some antiquated artillery shells? And it's an amazing thing that we were 14 months into combat, so I was very experienced, but to have 32 guys who trust you with their lives. And when you go out there, it's an unbelievable thing. And there was a series of credibility, things that had to happen between having a Ranger tab and making the right decision. But all those guys, went back to their families and now have kids, and I'm able to follow them and stay in touch with them on Facebook. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. The platoon leader who went after me, I told him not to do it. He lost 1/4 of his platoon. It was 50-gallon drums, and he lost a team, and my interpreter was killed with them, even though I told him not to do it. So this rule is very important to me. The spirit, use your judgment. You are here, and the reason we want high performers is because I trust you. And the thing about bright line rules is that they don't cover all of the scenarios. You have a brain, and I want you to use it. And I will tell you that if you see something that is stupid, and you're like, we should not do that, then don't do it and report it up like this made 0 sense, and I got your back. I'll always have your back. And it's important to me. I've seen organizations go out. So, things like that might actually happen on the ground when it comes to IDme are like what we just had with a flight nurse, where it came in as a first responder. And technically we didn't approve it, or whatever. But I listened to it, I'm like, look, he's basically an EMT that just arrives to the accident site by helicopter. So our rule didn't make sense. Let's break it. And let's get to the right outcome for that guy, and then let's modify the rule and make the rule make more sense, right? that's what it's all about. And I expect you to use your common sense and to empathize with people and understand their situations so that our rules evolve, so that they're always enforcing the right outcome. All right, and then next. So this last one might seem like a summary thing. It's almost like a throwaway, but what it really talks about is my man Aristotle and my FBI profiler. That I love Aristotle. So Aristotle was the mentor to Alexander the Great, and I still think that that duo must have been amazing as they were like conquering the world together. But but he said, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit." And this goes back to when you have great talent and you have the work ethic too, and you can see it with all these athletes that we admire and respect, and you just, you know, Karl Malone used to do like defensive slides down like a mountain. Jerry Rice's workouts are so notorious that like elite athletes who are first round picks would go to work out with him and they'd leave within 48 hours because his off-season workouts were that intense. If you make excellence a habit in your life and you are committed to being your best self, you can be great at whatever role that you are disproportionately strong at. And so all these behaviors that we just talked about, it's not just understanding them, and it's not just exhibiting them some of the time, it's about making them a habit in your life. And when you join a high-performing culture like the Rangers or a reconnaissance platoon, you are expected to adapt your habits to the standard of the team. And that's what real culture is. It's not like these meaningless things about excellence and everything else these big companies who don't really understand what culture is will preach to you. It's about what we just talked about in this deck right here. And it's important to me that we live it because as Steve Jobs said, we have an amazing mission, we need great people, and it's going to take excellent people who have excellent habits in every single position across IDme to get to where we want to go. And I trust in all of you to do that, and I'm very proud and honored to be able to lead you. So thank you for spending some time with me this Friday afternoon.
Thank
Go drink some booze.